Abandoned by the wagon train, she faced the wild until a cowboy said, "Come with me." The wagon train moved slowly across the wide open land, its long line of wagons stretching like a thin ribbon against the horizon. Dust rose under the wheels and hung in the air, turning the sky pale and dry. People walked beside oxen and horses, their faces tired but determined. Every person on the trail carried a story, dreams of new land, escape from hardship, or hope for a better life. Among them was a young woman who kept mostly to herself. She worked quietly, never asking for much, always doing her share. She had joined the wagon train weeks earlier. Life had already tested her before the journey began, and she believed this long trip west might give her a chance to start over. She was not the loudest voice in the group, but she was steady and kind. She helped with cooking, watched over children when mothers were busy, and gathered firewood without being asked. Some travelers appreciated her quiet strength, but others hardly noticed her at all. Days on the trail followed a strict routine. At sunrise, people packed their camps, folded blankets, and prepared for another long day. The wagons rolled forward slowly, crossing dry plains and shallow rivers. Nights brought cold winds and tired conversations around small fires. Stories were shared, songs were sung, and sometimes laughter rose above the endless silence of the land. Yet danger was always close. Storms could appear without warning, and food had to be rationed carefully. As time passed, supplies grew thinner, tempers became shorter. Small disagreements turned into long arguments. The leaders of the wagon train worried constantly about reaching the next settlement before winter arrived. Every delay felt like a threat. One morning, the young woman woke feeling weak. The previous day had been long and difficult, and she had barely eaten. She tried to hide her condition, not wanting to become a burden, but her steps slowed as the wagons moved forward. A few people noticed and whispered among themselves. Fear began to spread, fear that anyone who could not keep pace might endanger the entire group. By midday, she struggled to walk beside the wagon. A kind older woman offered her water, but others looked at her with impatience. The trail leader rode back to speak with her. His face showed worry more than anger, but his words were firm. The group could not stop often, he said. They had to keep moving. She nodded quietly, trying to gather strength. Pride pushed her forward for several hours, but as the sun dipped lower, she stumbled again. The wagons continued to roll, and dust swallowed her view. When the group stopped briefly at sunset, a tense meeting took place among the leaders. Voices rose and fell. She sat nearby, hearing only fragments, words like risk, delay, and winter. When the decision came, it felt unreal. They would leave her with some supplies, promising that another wagon train or passing traveler might find her. It was spoken as if it were kindness, but the meaning was clear. She would not continue with them. Shock filled her chest, but she did not argue. She had seen fear in their eyes and understood that survival often made people hard. A few individuals avoided looking at her, ashamed of what was happening. The older woman who had given her water pressed a small bundle into her hands, dried food, and a blanket, whispering a quiet apology. Before sunrise the next morning, the wagon train prepared to move again. She stood beside the trail, watching silently. Wheels creaked, animals snorted, and people kept their eyes forward. One child waved at her, unaware of the heaviness of the moment. Then the line of wagons faded into the distance until only dust remained. For a long time, she did not move. The silence around her felt enormous. The land stretched in every direction, wild and unknown. Fear tried to settle into her thoughts, but she refused to let it take control. Sitting down would mean giving up, and she had survived too much in life to stop now. She began by searching the area for shelter. Nearby, she found a cluster of rocks that broke the wind slightly. Using fallen branches and pieces of cloth from her pack, she built a simple cover to protect herself from the night cold. It was not perfect, but it gave her purpose. The first night alone felt endless. Every sound seemed louder, the call of distant animals, the movement of grass in the wind. She kept a small fire burning, feeding it carefully to save her limited fuel. Memories of the wagon train passed through her mind, but instead of anger, she focused on staying calm. She reminded herself that she was still alive, and that meant there was still hope. Morning brought new challenges. Hunger and thirst pushed her to act quickly. She followed a dry creek bed until she found a small pool of water hidden between stones. Relief washed over her. She filled her container slowly, careful not to disturb the muddy ground too much. From that moment, she understood that survival depended on observation, watching birds for signs of water, studying the sun for direction, and moving with patience rather than panic. Days passed, each one testing her strength. She learned to gather edible plants she recognized and to conserve her energy during the hottest hours. The loneliness weighed heavily, but she began talking softly to herself, just to hear a human voice. At night, she watched the stars and remembered stories her family once told about finding direction through the sky. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled across the plains. Dark clouds gathered quickly, and strong winds shook her shelter. She held the structure together with trembling hands, determined not to lose the small safety she had created. Rain fell hard but briefly, leaving the air cooler and the land shining under fading sunlight. The storm reminded her that nature could be both harsh and generous. As she adapted to her surroundings, confidence slowly replaced fear. She realized she was stronger than she had believed. Every small success, finding water, building fire, resting without fear, felt like a victory. Still, she knew she could not remain alone forever. The supplies left by the wagon train would not last long. She began exploring further each day, marking her path with small stones so she would not get lost. One morning, while standing on a ridge, she noticed something unusual in the distance, a thin line of smoke rising into the sky. Her heart beat faster. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant people. Hope surged through her, but caution followed closely behind. Not everyone on the frontier could be trusted. She watched for a long time, studying the movement of the smoke and trying to guess how far away it might be. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, she packed her few belongings and made a decision. Staying still was no longer enough. If she wanted a future, she had to move forward again. The morning felt colder than the days before, and the sky stretched wide and pale above her. She walked slowly but with purpose, keeping her eyes fixed on the distant line of smoke she had seen the day before. Each step required effort. Her body was tired from days of surviving alone, but the thought of finding another human being gave her strength she did not know she still had. The land around her changed as she walked. The flat open plains slowly gave way to rolling hills dotted with dry grass and scattered trees. Birds circled high above, and the wind carried the scent of dust and sun-warmed earth. She paused often to listen, learning that silence could reveal hidden sounds, the rustle of animals, the whisper of wind, or signs that someone else might be near. By midday, the sun burned brightly, forcing her to rest under the shade of a small tree. She drank carefully from her water supply, reminding herself not to waste anything. While resting, she watched the horizon closely. The smoke was still there, thin but steady. It felt like a promise waiting just beyond reach. As she continued walking, her thoughts drifted between hope and caution. The wagon train had taught her that people could change when fear took over. She wanted to believe she would find kindness again, but she prepared herself for any outcome. Survival had made her more aware, more careful. Late in the afternoon, she saw movement ahead. At first, she thought it was an animal, but then she noticed the shape of a rider on horseback. The figure moved slowly across the land, steady and calm. Her heart began to race. She stopped walking and waited, unsure whether to approach or hide. The rider noticed her before she could decide. He guided his horse closer but kept a respectful distance, as if sensing her uncertainty. The man wore a wide hat that shaded his face, and his posture showed patience rather than urgency. He did not rush toward her or call out loudly. Instead, he slowed the horse to a gentle walk. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved between them, carrying the quiet tension of strangers meeting in a wild place. Finally, he lifted one hand slightly in greeting. "You look like you've come a long way," he said calmly. His voice was steady, not demanding. She nodded but did not step closer. She had learned to be careful with trust. The man seemed to understand her hesitation. He reached into his saddlebag slowly and took out a small water canteen, placing it on the ground between them before stepping back. "You can take it if you need," he added. She watched him carefully, searching for signs of danger, but saw none. Hunger and thirst pushed her forward. She picked up the canteen and drank slowly, feeling relief spread through her body. The water tasted clean and cool. He waited quietly, giving her space. After a moment, she spoke. Her voice felt rough from days of silence. She told him she had been traveling with a wagon train but had been left behind when she fell ill and slowed their journey. She kept her explanation simple, not wanting to reveal too much too quickly. The cowboy listened without interrupting. His eyes showed concern, but he did not ask too many questions. When she finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "That trail's been hard on many people," he said. "You're lucky you held on this long." She wasn't sure if luck was the right word, but she understood what he meant. He explained that he traveled alone most of the time, moving between small settlements and guiding cattle when needed. His life was quiet, shaped by long days and open skies. He mentioned a small ranch not far from where they stood, a place where she could rest safely. She hesitated. Trust did not come easily anymore. He seemed to sense her thoughts. "You don't have to decide now," he said gently, "but it's not safe to stay out here alone for long." His words carried no pressure, only honesty. They walked together for a short distance, keeping space between them. The silence felt less heavy than before. He pointed out landmarks she had missed, a distant hill that could guide travelers, a line of trees marking a water source. She realized he knew the land well, and that knowledge brought a small sense of comfort. As they reached a ridge, she saw it, a small ranch in the distance, simple buildings surrounded by open land and a few grazing animals. Smoke rose from a chimney, the same smoke she had followed for hours. Seeing it made her chest tighten with relief. He stopped his horse and turned toward her. "You're welcome there," he said simply. "Come with me." The words felt heavier than they sounded. They held the promise of safety, but also the risk of trusting someone new. She looked at the ranch again, imagining warmth, food, and rest. She thought about the cold nights alone and the endless silence. Slowly, she nodded. He offered his hand to help her onto the horse, but she chose to walk beside him instead. He respected her choice without question. As they approached the ranch, she noticed small details, tools neatly placed outside, a water trough filled carefully, and a sense of order that suggested patience and care. The place felt lived in but peaceful. Inside the main cabin, the air felt warm and welcoming. He prepared a simple meal without making a fuss, placing food in front of her and stepping back to give her time. She ate slowly at first, then with growing hunger as her body remembered what it felt like to be nourished. After eating, exhaustion finally caught up with her. He showed her a small bed near the window and assured her she could rest without worry. For the first time in many days, she lay down without fear of the unknown. Sleep came quickly, deep and heavy. When she woke the next morning, sunlight filled the room. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the memories returned, the wagon train, the wilderness, and the quiet cowboy who had offered help without asking anything in return. Outside, she found him working calmly, feeding animals and preparing for the day. He greeted her with a simple nod, as if her presence was already part of the routine. Days began to take shape around small tasks. She helped where she could, slowly rebuilding her strength. He never demanded anything from her, allowing her to choose her own pace. Conversations grew easier, and silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward. Yet inside her, a question remained. Could she truly trust this new path? Or was this only a temporary shelter before another change? As the sun set one evening, painting the sky in soft colors, she realized something had shifted. The fear that had followed her since being abandoned felt lighter. She was no longer alone against the wild. Morning light entered the cabin softly, warming the wooden walls and the simple bed where she rested. For the first time since being left behind by the wagon train, she woke without fear pressing heavily on her chest. The quiet felt peaceful instead of lonely. Outside, she could hear distant sounds, the soft movement of animals, the creak of wood, and the calm rhythm of someone working. She sat up slowly, still adjusting to this new place. The memory of the cowboy's kindness felt almost unreal compared to the harsh days she had survived alone. She dressed and stepped outside, where the wide land stretched in every direction. The ranch looked small against the open sky, yet it felt strong and steady. The cowboy was near the fence, checking on a horse. He greeted her with a simple smile and handed her a warm drink. No long speech, no questions, just quiet acceptance. She appreciated that he did not rush her or expect anything. It allowed her to breathe and feel safe at her own pace. The days that followed settled into a gentle routine. She helped with simple tasks, first only small things like cleaning tools or preparing meals. Slowly, as her strength returned, she joined him in outdoor work. She learned how to care for animals, repair fences, and manage supplies. Each task gave her a sense of purpose she had almost forgotten. The cowboy worked hard but never complained. He showed her how to do things carefully, explaining without making her feel inexperienced. Sometimes they spoke while working, sharing small stories about their past. Other times they worked in silence, which felt just as comfortable. Trust did not appear suddenly. It grew slowly, like a seed planted in quiet soil. At first, she watched him carefully, expecting signs that he might change or reveal hidden intentions. But days turned into weeks, and he remained steady, kind without being controlling, helpful without asking for anything in return. One afternoon, a neighbor rode by to check on the ranch. The visitor greeted her warmly, showing that the cowboy was known and respected in the area. Hearing others speak kindly about him eased some of her remaining fear. She began to feel that maybe she had truly found a safe place. Despite the growing comfort, memories of the wagon train still returned at night. She remembered the moment they left her behind, the sound of wheels moving away, and the empty silence that followed. Sometimes those memories made her feel heavy and unsure. On one such evening, she sat outside alone, staring at the horizon. The cowboy noticed but did not interrupt. Instead, he joined her quietly, sitting nearby without speaking. After a long silence, she began to talk about her past, not everything at once, but small pieces. She shared how she had hoped the journey would change her life, and how painful it felt to be abandoned by people she trusted. He listened carefully, never judging, never offering quick answers. When she finished, he simply said, "You're still here. That says a lot about your strength." Those words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. As weeks passed, she started to feel something she had not expected, happiness in small moments. She laughed when a young calf followed her around the yard. She felt proud when she repaired a fence by herself. Even simple meals tasted better when shared with someone who appreciated her presence. The land itself began to feel different. Instead of a place of danger, it became a space of freedom. She explored nearby hills, learning the paths and discovering hidden streams. The cowboy encouraged her independence, showing her safe routes and teaching her how to read signs in nature. One morning, travelers arrived at the ranch asking for directions. They brought news from other trails, including stories about wagon trains struggling with harsh weather and difficult choices. Hearing this stirred deep emotions inside her. She wondered what had happened to the group that left her behind. Were they safe? Did they regret their decision? That night, she found herself restless. She realized that while she had begun healing, part of her still carried unanswered questions. The cowboy noticed her unease and gently asked if something was wrong. She admitted that hearing news about the wagon trains had reopened old thoughts. He did not tell her what to do. Instead, he said, "Sometimes the past needs to be faced before it can rest." His words gave her something to think about. Days continued with steady work and growing comfort. The bond between them deepened naturally. They trusted each other not because of dramatic promises, but because of consistent actions, shared meals, honest conversations, and quiet support. She started making small changes to the ranch, planting herbs near the cabin and organizing supplies more efficiently. The cowboy welcomed her ideas, showing that he saw her as an equal partner rather than a guest. This made her feel valued in a way she had rarely experienced before. One evening, as they watched the sunset together, she realized how much she had changed. The woman who once walked alone through the wilderness felt stronger, more confident. She was no longer just surviving, she was living. Yet she also understood that healing did not mean forgetting. The past remained part of her story, shaping who she had become. She wondered if facing it directly might finally bring closure. The cowboy sensed her thoughts even before she spoke them. He nodded slowly and said, "Whatever you choose, you won't face it alone." Those simple words filled her with warmth and courage. As the stars appeared in the night sky, she felt a quiet determination growing inside her. The ranch had given her safety and time to heal, but the journey was not finished yet. She knew that sooner or later she would need to decide whether to confront the past or leave it behind forever. For now, she allowed herself to enjoy the calm. The fire crackled softly, and the wide sky stretched endlessly above them. In that peaceful moment, she felt gratitude for survival, for unexpected kindness, and for the chance to rebuild a life she once thought was lost. The morning air was crisp, carrying the smell of grass and soil, and the ranch lay quiet beneath the rising sun. She stepped outside, noticing the familiar sounds of the animals moving and the cowboy already at work feeding the horses. Days had passed peacefully, Yet a new thought pressed on her mind. The wagon train, the group that had left her behind, had been part of her past, and news of their struggles had reached her ears through travelers. She could no longer ignore the question of what had become of them. The cowboy noticed the seriousness in her eyes. He did not ask questions, only gave a small nod, acknowledging that she had something important to decide. "If you want to see them, I'll go with you," he said. She felt a mixture of fear, relief, and determination. She had survived alone, learned to rely on her own strength, and yet she did not want to face the past without support. His calm offer made the decision easier. She packed a small bag, taking the essentials she had grown accustomed to carrying. The journey toward the nearest settlement would be long, but the cowboy knew the land well and guided her along safe paths, avoiding rough terrain and wild areas where animals roamed. As they traveled, the land changed from rolling hills to stretches of open plains, dotted with distant trees. She noticed every detail, the way the sun glinted off rocks, the sound of a river in the distance, the movement of clouds across the sky. Her senses were sharper now. She was no longer a frightened traveler, but someone fully aware of her surroundings. Hours passed with quiet conversation. She shared small stories from her past, memories of home, moments from the wagon train, and the struggles she had endured alone. The cowboy listened without interrupting, showing respect and patience. In return, he told stories of his own life on the frontier, of lessons learned from long days and quiet nights. She found comfort in these exchanges, realizing that connection could exist without pressure or expectation. As they neared the settlement, the signs of human life became clearer. Smoke rose from chimneys, horses clattered in small yards, and children's voices echoed across open streets. The sight brought mixed emotions. She felt anxious about seeing familiar faces who had once abandoned her. Yet she also felt a sense of readiness. She had survived alone and come a long way. She was stronger now. When they arrived, a small group of travelers noticed them and greeted the cowboy. They exchanged news of the wagon trains, confirming the difficulties she had heard about. Survivors were gathered, recovering from harsh weather and illness. Her heart raced as she walked among them, uncertain of the reactions she might encounter. Some of the wagon train members looked at her with shame, unable to meet her gaze. Others avoided her entirely, unwilling to face what had happened. She listened, observing without anger, understanding that people acted out of fear and circumstance. The past could not be changed, but she had control over how it affected her now. The meeting brought closure she had not realized she needed. Hearing apologies, seeing regret, and witnessing human frailty reminded her that survival often came with difficult choices. She felt neither anger nor resentment, only a quiet strength and the knowledge that she had endured and grown beyond the hardships of abandonment. The cowboy stood beside her throughout, never pushing, only offering steady support. His presence reminded her that trust and companionship could exist after loss, that kindness and patience were not always fleeting. She realized that while the past shaped her, it did not define her future. Returning to the ranch felt like stepping into a new chapter. The place that had once been a refuge now felt like a home, strengthened by the knowledge that she had faced the past and survived. She worked alongside the cowboy as usual, tending animals, repairing fences, and preparing meals. Each task reinforced her independence and capability, showing that she had learned much from the wilderness and her journey. At night, she often sat outside watching the stars, reflecting on the journey. She thought about the people who had abandoned her, the harsh land she had crossed, and the quiet strength she had discovered within herself. The cowboy sometimes joined her, and they would sit together in silence, comfortable with each other's presence without words. As weeks passed, she began to take more initiative at the ranch. She organized supplies, planted herbs near the cabin, and even suggested ways to improve routines. The cowboy welcomed her input, treating her as an equal partner rather than a guest. This recognition strengthened her confidence and deepened the bond between them. One afternoon, she discovered a young colt struggling to walk in the field. She carefully guided it back to safety, feeding it and tending its small injuries. The cowboy watched silently, proud of her actions without needing to voice it. These moments reminded her that resilience was not only about surviving hardship, but also about caring for others and embracing responsibility. The seasons began to shift, with cooler winds and changing colors in the grass and trees. Life at the ranch felt steady, full of challenges and rewards. She no longer feared the wilderness or the unknown. She had faced both and emerged capable and confident. Through these experiences, she learned that independence and companionship could coexist. She did not need to rely solely on others, but neither did she need to face life entirely alone. The cowboy's steady presence, coupled with her own strength, created a balance she had not known she could achieve. Evenings brought quiet reflection. She sometimes thought of the wagon train, the life she might have had, and the people she had left behind. Yet she knew that dwelling on what could not be changed would only weigh her down. She focused instead on the present, the animals she cared for, the land she tended, and the trust and connection she had found with the cowboy. As night fell one evening, she realized how far she had come. She had endured abandonment, survived alone in the wild, faced the past, and returned home stronger than before. The journey had tested her in every way, yet it had also revealed her resilience, courage, and ability to trust again. Sitting by the fire, she looked at the cowboy, who was quietly repairing a fence. She felt gratitude not just for his help, but for the lessons she had learned, the strength she had discovered, and the life she was building. The open plains stretched before them, full of challenges and possibilities, yet she no longer felt fear. Instead, she felt readiness, hope, and the quiet certainty that she could face whatever lay ahead. That night, the stars shone bright above the ranch, reflecting in the calmness she felt inside. For the first time in a long time, she believed that the future was hers to shape. And though she had faced hardships, abandonment, and fear, she knew she would continue forward with courage and the knowledge that she was never truly alone again. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, spreading a warm, golden light across the open fields. Birds called to each other from the trees, and the soft sound of a river nearby added a gentle rhythm to the day. She stepped outside and felt a calm settle over her, a sense of belonging she had not known since the wagon train left her behind. The ranch had become more than a safe place. It was now a home she helped shape, a space where she had regained strength, confidence, and hope. The cowboy was already working, feeding the horses and checking the fences. He looked up and offered her a small nod, the kind of greeting that spoke of respect and familiarity rather than words. She smiled back, feeling the quiet comfort of their connection. Over the weeks, she had grown accustomed to the rhythms of ranch life, the rising and setting of the sun, the work with animals, and the simple routines that gave each day structure. Each task she completed reinforced her independence and reminded her of how much she had overcome. She began the day by caring for a small herd of cattle. Moving among the animals, she spoke softly, guiding them toward the pasture and checking their health. She noticed a young calf struggling to keep up and gently encouraged it along, offering food and attention until it was steady on its feet. The cowboy watched from a distance, appreciating her confidence and the careful way she handled every detail. It had become clear that she was no longer the frightened woman abandoned on the plains. She had grown into someone strong, capable, and self-assured. After feeding the animals, she turned to repair a section of fence that had been damaged by a recent storm. The work required focus, strength, and patience. She hammered posts carefully, making sure they were straight and secure. As she worked, she thought about how much she had learned from the challenges she had faced. The days spent alone in the wilderness, the skills she had developed to survive, and the lessons of patience, observation, and careful decision-making. Everything she had endured now felt like preparation for this moment, for the life she was building here. By midday, the sun was high, and she took a brief break to drink water and rest. She watched the cowboy tending the land, moving with steady purpose. He approached her and handed over a simple lunch, bread, cheese, and fresh water. They ate together quietly, the kind of silence that was comfortable rather than empty. There were no words about the past, no need to explain every thought or feeling. They shared space, work, and understanding, and that was enough. The afternoon brought a new challenge. A small group of travelers arrived at the ranch, seeking help and advice. Some were lost and tired, others brought news from nearby settlements. She helped the cowboy guide them, offering water and simple directions. Each interaction reminded her that kindness could ripple outward, that the help she had received could now be extended to others. She realized that her experiences had given her a perspective that others on the frontier needed: strength, resilience, and practical knowledge born of survival. As the sun began to lower toward the horizon, she took a moment to step away from the work. The fields stretched wide and golden before her, the river glinting in the fading light. Memories of the wagon train, of being left alone, came to her briefly. Yet these memories no longer carried fear or pain. Instead, they served as a reminder of how far she had come and how much she had grown. She had faced the wild, faced abandonment, and faced uncertainty. Each trial had made her stronger and wiser. The cowboy joined her, standing quietly at her side. He did not need to speak. Their shared presence was enough. Together, they watched the sun sink behind distant hills, the sky painted with shades of orange, pink, and purple. She felt a sense of completion, a realization that this life, built with effort, courage, and trust, was hers to live fully. Evenings were now a time of reflection and quiet connection. They tended to the fire together, shared small meals, and spoke of simple plans for the coming days. Sometimes, they laughed at small mistakes or the playful antics of the animals. Other times, they sat in silence, listening to the night and feeling the calm that came from hard work and shared understanding. She felt gratitude for these moments, for safety, for trust, for the steady presence of someone who had never tried to control or rush her. As days passed, she contributed more to the ranch. She organized supplies, planted herbs, and helped improve the cabins and pens. Her input was welcomed, and she began to see herself not just as someone who had survived, but as someone capable of shaping her environment, helping others, and making meaningful decisions. Her confidence grew, not from words or praise, but from action and experience. One morning, while exploring a small grove near the river, she found a quiet space where wildflowers bloomed. She paused there, kneeling among the colors and scents, feeling a deep sense of connection to the land. The trials she had faced, loneliness, danger, abandonment, had led her to this place of safety and growth. She understood that life could be harsh, but it could also be gentle, and that courage was not only in facing danger but also in embracing peace and opportunity. The seasons changed, bringing cooler winds and shifting skies. She and the cowboy continued their routines, facing small challenges like repairing fences, moving cattle, and weathering storms. Each challenge reinforced their bond and their sense of purpose. She noticed how natural it felt to work alongside him, how easy it was to communicate through actions, glances, and shared understanding. Trust had grown fully now, built on steady consistency and respect. At night, she often stood at the edge of the ranch, looking at the stars reflected in the river and thinking of the long journey that had brought her here. She thought of the days alone in the wilderness, of the fear and uncertainty, and of the strength she had discovered within herself. She realized that the life she now had, filled with connection, purpose, and calm, was not only a gift, but also the result of her perseverance. The cowboy joined her one evening, carrying a small lantern. He did not speak at first, simply standing beside her. When he did, his words were simple: "You've come a long way. You've earned this." She smiled, understanding that the journey was never about avoiding struggle, but about growing through it and finding strength and hope along the way. Life on the ranch had become rich with small moments: tending animals, repairing tools, preparing meals, watching sunsets, sharing quiet conversations. She no longer thought of herself as someone abandoned or weak. She was capable, resilient, and fully present in a life she had built with her own hands and with the trust she had found in another. As night fell and the stars shone bright above, she felt peace settle in her heart. The open plains stretched endlessly, full of possibility, but she no longer feared what lay ahead. She had faced hardship, survived the wild, confronted the past, and built a life she could be proud of. She realized that strength, kindness, and courage had guided her to this point, and that with the cowboy by her side, she could face anything the future might bring. The fire crackled softly, and the quiet sounds of the ranch filled the night. She watched the flames dance and felt the warmth in her chest. For the first time in a long time, she believed in tomorrow not as a hope or a dream, but as something she could shape with her own hands. The journey had ended not with fear, but with courage, growth, and the promise of life fully lived. And as she looked at the wide horizon, she knew that the wilderness she had once feared was no longer a place of danger, but a part of the world where she had discovered herself, where she had survived, and where she had found trust, connection, and the freedom to live fully. The story of abandonment, struggle, and survival had become a story of hope, courage, and a new beginning.